Alright everyone. Good evening, this is Rillian and Amara. Today we're going over emotions that you use to play Street Fighter and other fighting games. This content is being rebroadcast from Amara2_MK's channel to our group's main 2_MK channel with our full permission. So today we're dealing with what it is that you use emotionally to play the game and how you can prevent yourself from losing sight of your goals based on how you feel. Everyone plays Street Fighter with a different emotion, and you could see that if you were fortunate enough to watch EVO Street Fighter this weekend, in that we had many players in the top 8 with extremely different emotional states, and these are mostly their defaults. We had the ever happy Itabashi Zangief, Punk, and MOV, who generally treat other players as if they're no real match for them and that they are the superior players. Moke, who seemed to be also sort of a happy guy, but a little more focused than Itabashi directly. And similarly, Knuckle-Doo, who tends to be more of a jerk in the sense that he sets out to keep other people on tilt. And when I say on tilt, I specifically refer to the feeling that whatever emotion you naturally use to play the game isn't working. It's important for you to learn how to make sure that everything you do in a match lines up somehow with your own emotions, or you'll end up shifting out of the state that you are trying to play in. And this state, this alternate state, being on tilt as it's put, can really limit your ability to focus on the game and your ability to enjoy the game. But being on tilt doesn't necessarily mean being angry. Being on tilt means being out of your normal state. So you could easily be angry and not be on tilt if you were just angry all the time. There are some people for whom this game is relaxing. There are some people for whom making other people frustrated is a great experience. And there are some people who are just mad at the game all the time. Not necessarily mad at the game because of anything to do with the game, just mad. Mad at the opponent, mad at themselves. It's usually better to be mad at the opponent, but this only breaks your focus if being mad isn't the way you play normally. After all, you could be mad and defend, you could be mad and rush down, you could be mad and go for the hardest of reads. Those things don't matter unless you're not normally mad, because being mad makes most people aggressive in the game, but they don't have to be. Amara's usual state in the game is sort of like that. She plays this game partly to let off steam and partly to, like, just focus on being mad at things. It doesn't have to be that you play the game with a positive emotion, as proven by, again, top 8 of EVO. Only like half of those people actually play the game with some positive feeling behind it directly. They enjoy it, but some people enjoy being mad. Because not being mad makes you try to be calculated when maybe that's not what you want. But the world does teach us that we should learn to control our emotions, that we should not be upset all the time. That is completely true when you are trying to communicate with someone in a nice business environment or whatever, but this is a fight. This is specifically a competitive experience. You don't have to not be mad at your opponent, at least during the fight. If it carries over after the fight, maybe you have some issues with control, but that's another thing to focus on and learn. It's better if you don't break any controllers too, obviously, but you know.
Round 1.
For example, Amara here is currently aiming to mostly get in on this Guile. And it's not working too well. The Guile keeps on getting advantage. But this is because Amara as a player doesn't like getting in on people generally. She just tends to feel as if she doesn't, then Guile will just win. Now while this is true to some extent, the bigger problem is more so that once Guile gets moving, and Amara stops being properly mad, she also stops being able to parry a lot of his stuff, because she hits buttons instead of hitting parry. This is because parry isn't a good outlet for her anger as yet. It's her skill set that hasn't been built up to fight in that mode, because as you can see, she keeps on moving toward the opponent. But she would much prefer to just throw him about the place like a ragdoll and throw fireballs. And parry those, obviously. But how do you stay mad and still do all this? It can be rather hard. But as you can see, once she stops like doing that and decides, fine, I'm leaving you over there or whatever, it doesn't really matter. She now has the life lead. She could just be mad over here and throw endless amounts of fireballs. The Guile player's job then is to try to get in. That, for example, almost worked. Feeling bad about it would be probably negative here. The key is to center your emotions in yourself and not spend a lot of time focusing on your opponent. Even if your opponent is the thing making you mad, focusing on your opponent and not, for example, the things you are doing that are wrong or the space between your character and theirs, that's what causes you to lose when you're angry or when you're emotional. Again, if you're generally a happy-go-lucky player and your opponent somehow manages to make you upset, that's probably not so good. You have to figure out why that's happening to you. If it is that a particular emotion leads you to do a particular action in a fight, and that is why you lose. If it is that being angry makes your execution bad. But these things aren't specifically a reason to stop fighting angry. Because, in the end, if you could learn to do your execution when angry, you'd probably be better off if you are the sort of person that gets angry easily. Learning to calm yourself in a fighting game is not about getting yourself down to a positive emotion or a quote-unquote good state. It's about learning that whatever state you are naturally in when you're fighting, you have to learn to control that. So, a response to a particular opponent is highly developed around what they are making you feel at the time. And your aim is that no matter what it is that you start off feeling, you want to keep feeling mostly that. In fact, for people who are often angry or often upset, or in my case, flatly vitriolic when it comes to this game, it's not really about whether or not they hate the game. And you often get told things like, don't take it so seriously, or maybe you should take a break. In many cases, the person telling you that doesn't actually understand that this could easily be how you play the game. The question is just, can you control what you're mad at? Or can you control the way that you're mad at it? Now for characters with very precise execution, you would think, well, there's no way that's going to work. With characters with very precise timing, you'd also think this to some extent anyway. But again, we have top 8 of EVO. Filipino Champ nearly managed to handle Tokido. Filipino Champ is playing a character who must be played slowly, must be played mostly reactively, and requires a ton of control of space, and yet, somehow, as twitchy as he is, he's a Dalsim master. He's a relatively high level Dalsim master, probably, in many people's opinion, the best Dalsim in the world. And yet, he is nowhere near as calm as his character would indicate. Tokido, at least, is playing in a character who is basically angry all the time, and he is being more or less true to his roots, but he actually shifts. He's sort of happy to be angry, which is another good thing for Akuma players in general. We have El Rock James, the Italian? Is that Italian Cammy or was that Mexican? I believe that was an Italian Cammy. I would explain the 4 bars. We get fairly good connections to Europe, actually. It gets a little laggy at times, but it's more so ping drops than anything else. So we don't have to worry too much about it. So, Cammy players, for example, make Amara angry because they get in too easily. And they require a lot of high-speed reactions, and it just gets on her nerves mostly. But she could get mad at that part of the matchup, rather than getting mad at herself or mad at the Cammy player. Cammys mostly annoy her because they jump, and if she could Shoryuken them every time, then that would feel good. It would generally be cathartic relative to the anger. But in order to feel that, she has to believe that they're going to jump all the time. And for that, she has to be mad at the idea of them jumping all the time. The best way for someone who has negative emotions towards Street Fighter, hate, anger, general disgust at their opponents, is to focus on the part of the matchup that is giving you trouble as the target of that feeling. Not the player, it's not the player's fault. The player could be terrible, in the sense that if you were doing things properly, they would just lose completely, and then why would you have to be mad at them? You might still be mad, but you then could focus on being mad at the thing they're doing wrong and how much it annoys you.
You win.
So defeating this Cammy, for example, becomes relatively easier because Amara can just be mad at Cammy getting in, or be mad at Cammy jumping in. No, it was Mexico. Cool.
Round 1.
And if she stays mad at Cammy jumping in and isn't too mad at any other part of the game, then stuff that happens on the ground won't necessarily make her feel terrible. She might feel upset about things that she does wrong, but we all feel upset about those things. But this sort of feeling where they're dancing around and just generally being a pain, gives that feeling of, I don't want you to do this. This frustrates or upsets me somehow. But the other part of this is the control and confidence to see that happen and respond correctly even though you're upset. And that's why it's so important to focus in on different parts of a matchup. For example, against Cammy is a general thing. Amara needs to finish her combos a lot of the time. She needs to focus fairly heavily on that. Because Cammy's the sort of person who, if you don't finish your combo, she'll get this or that on you. But it's not that that match was lost specifically because Amara got mad. It didn't really help to try to calm down either, because the thing that was going wrong in the match didn't have anything to do with how upset she was. It has to do with practice and spacing, which are not in any way connected to being mad. In fact, you can sabotage your own game a ton by telling yourself that you are the one messing up because your emotions are running wild or something, when really it's the game. Like, not even a fault of the game. Your opponent is spacing themselves a certain way, so you don't have an option to deal with them properly. And then you go, well, I could have dealt with that if I had been calmer. You just mislead yourself and end up thinking that you are, one, better than you are, and two, that you are making mistakes in the long term that you can fix, when a higher level player will just show you immediately that's not really what's happening. So this player jumped a lot, and then they got knocked out of jumping, and then they stopped jumping because they don't really have anything beyond that. If you stop them from jumping, they just dance around because they don't know what else to do. The key there is, I was mad at you jumping, and now you don't jump anymore, so should you stay mad? It's up to you if you stay mad or not, but you could stay mad at the concept of them jumping. That allows you to focus on them jumping and not lose yourself in, okay, time to play the rest of the match, when there is no rest of the match. This particular player isn't good enough yet for there to be a rest of the match. But being focused on that makes it easier to deal with them. And now basically, unless they figure out some way in to hurt her in the next 20 seconds, they've lost. That didn't work. And neither did that. Now that may not have been the thing Amara focused on, but it did work in the end. Being able to focus on being angry at jumping means that you can continue to play at that level without thinking too hard about what your opponent is trying to do or figuring that they have some long-term plan. Which most people don't, honestly. Like, it takes a long time before people start to come up with really complex plans, and you in turn have to learn yours over time, so trying to have them all early is asking a lot of yourself. Now, in general, our bots are a decent way to deal with this, because fighting a bot is extremely specific in terms of what is actually your goal. It's not going to be getting mad and hitting them with big combos. In fact, it's specifically because we realized that that could create a bad emotional habit that we have nearly no bots where the goal is to defeat them. The goal is always something other than hitting them really hard. Except in the case of like crush counter punishes on shoryukens or something where regardless of whether you're happy or mad, you need to learn those particular things. And this is the reason why it helps when it comes to fighting people, because if you let yourself feel the same emotions against people that you do against bots and vice versa, you get a lot more practice in the emotional sense of how to play the game.
Round 1. Fight!
For example, Nash does lots of things. Mara doesn't have a particular thing that Nash does that makes her angry that I'm aware of. But Nash players in general have a lot of ability to move around and zone particular ways. I think probably among the things she dislikes the most has to do with his dash throw. And the fact that his sweep is really long and very difficult to punish. The rest is just matchup knowledge or not knowing what to punish or how to punish it. But that's not really I'm losing to Nash. That's Nash makes me angry in this particular way because I am not doing as well. But it does mean that she gets to play her version of the game fairly well. If anything, I'd say that's probably it. Nash throwing stuff and not getting hit by fireballs, given that she likes to throw fireballs. So this match is sort of slow. And in that way it can become frustrating for different types of players. Nash matches frustrate me. Especially Nashes who don't like to, who basically don't want to fight at all and who want to wait for you to make a mistake completely. Because I play characters who are really easy to zone. So it makes this whole situation kind of frustrating. But you can eventually get them to do something. And the speed that Nash moves at, being relatively slow, means that Amara has a lot of time to make decisions about how exactly to handle them. This player, for example, given enough time, will do Tragedy Assault. Tragedy Assault, I don't remember, but it's probably punishable by target combo. So if Tragedy Assault was the thing she kept on getting hit by, or he uses to get in and makes her annoyed about that, then she can probably find a way to punish it. It's not the knowing how to punish it that becomes frustrating. The other thing could be, for example, Nash constantly being in a position where it's a bad idea to throw Hadoukens. He does tend to have this capacity. He is usually either too close or too far away for you to safely throw Hadoukens.
Round 1. Fight.
But she could focus on being mad that she doesn't get to throw Hadoukens and aim to get into that space. This particular Nash, if you push him to a particular space, seems to jump a lot, for example. Now, she could either not put him there because it's annoying, or she could put him there specifically to be mad at it and punish it.
I suggest you stay down.
But the key is always that when you are mad, you don't let the anger dictate the motion you make if you don't know the motion. Because you'll just hit random things mostly. But you can see she has a considerable life lead here, and no particular reason to deal with him at any really strong range. He can't do a lot. But eventually, if he keeps doing certain things, she'll act and get mad because the acting is not helping. That sort of thing is more so what I was referring to before. When your anger in some way causes you to lose track of a situation that you would probably aim to have it cause you to focus more on. Well, part of the reason this happens, for those who aren't aware, and that would probably be nearly everyone, is because Mara has spent a lot of time trying to teach herself not to be angry at things. So fighting games are a totally new experience for her in that regard, where someone is basically telling you, if you don't get mad, and if you don't learn how to use the anger to do a particular thing, then you will just end up trying to suppress it, but it won't lead to better success. That's the main problem here. The promise that when you stop being mad, you'll focus better, for certain people, that's not true. So all that happens is that they spend a lot more time trying to control their anger and don't actually get any better results out of it. Which I think everyone can agree is a fully negative experience. You aren't having fun. You're putting a lot of energy into controlling an emotion rather than controlling the match, and the result isn't actually coming out any better. In fact, there are many people who quit fighting games out of frustration, and they would be able to continue because the thing that they are feeling, that frustration is not actually frustration with the game, it's just that everyone else teaches them to be frustrated with the game. They tell you that if you are not doing well, it's because you're getting angry, and yet things are constantly happening that you can't figure out to not be angry at.
If you stand in my way, I will kill you. Round one.
Not all of us can simply get through the lower levels to figure out how to not be mad about these things. For example here, he can keep on absorbing those. It doesn't actually matter if he does or not. He now has full meter. Amara could just throw them for the sake of eventually getting him with one. Because the damage she will take in that case from most people who don't have a lot of meter or skill isn't so much that she needs to care. But now, here's the part where it matters the most. If she is angry enough, she'll just realize, okay, now you don't have meter. You can't get away from my Hadoukens. So I'm now going to throw these, which you can't do anything about at all. You can dodge some of them, but I don't care. You don't have meter. So she has basically now managed to win by timeout. Or would be able to if this goes a little bit in her favor from here. Not today.
I'm over. I don't have time for this.
Ryu can actually just use his meter to stall sometimes.
Down you go.
Anger also stops the after image effect to some extent, because you don't end up as fixated on what your opponent was doing before. You tend to be more focused on what they're doing now. But again, it makes her feel as if she has to get in, when she should just be angry from over here. Because if she walks forward after every Hadouken, eventually, he will kill himself. But every time she does anything else, she will get into the situation where she loses. So, the feeling of, this opponent is managing to stop me from doing what I want and that makes me upset, doesn't have to be met with, okay, I should calm down, I should try something else. Because you'll note, the something else doesn't work. At all. But because you have the feeling that it might work, it's more likely that you'll just lose and blame yourself. Really, she just needs to figure out to vary the fireball timing enough to hit him with them. And if it takes really long to figure out how to do that, then so be it. But because he can only block so many of these. And eventually she'll get meter and be able to do it herself. A really powerful player can get away from those, but most people can't. The key is to recognize emotionally when your problem is your approach, rather than when your problem is your skill at executing said approach. Because if your problem is skill at executing something, then you should keep on trying to execute the thing until you win. Or until you get better at it. In this case, for example, she doesn't have the skill to defend this. But this doesn't mean that she shouldn't be defending this. It means that she doesn't know how to defend it, and she has to learn how to defend it. A higher level player does just defend that entire sequence and then find a specific opening. But if you get caught up in it and tell yourself, I should do something different, then that happens instead. And you feel, okay, well, that happened, but at least I was doing the right thing. But that's not actually true. You weren't necessarily doing the right thing. Now what do we know about Nash's V skill? Nash's V skill actually takes a while to recover from. But because Ryu can't throw another fireball until the first one gets absorbed properly, he can't gain advantage that way. Well, the question is, what could Ryu do to Nash at that range that would make sure that he got into a bad situation after the fireball is thrown? Possibly nothing. but deciding to stop throwing fireballs leaves the Nash player in a situation where they are getting to play their game and often frustrating you where it doesn't work at all. Hello, Snowborough. Well, actually, I'll address that point. It's definitely that the adrenaline rush can also be controlled. Can it be controlled really well? Well, let's see. Who do we know that plays mostly off adrenaline? In the top levels, definitely Nemo plays off his adrenaline. Dogura, I'm not so sure. Dogura looks like he does, but Dogura's face is always like, I have no idea. But the adrenaline rush is a thing that makes most people twitchy, I'd say. And the key to controlling that is, well, it depends mostly on what character one plays. So let's look at that. Twitchiness is good for people who like to play characters who are often plus on block. Bison, Chun-Li, Rashid, where they can put pressure on another person for a really long time. And that twitchiness gives them the edge because the opponent never knows what's really going on. The adrenaline makes them sometimes even go so far as to mess up stuff. But that sort of player can learn how to play characters where even when you press your inputs incorrectly, even if you quote-unquote do the wrong thing, something good still happens. It's not very good to play extremely defensive technical characters like Ryu where, oh, I've hit this button and instead of what I wanted, something with very different properties happened. That's usually bad for you. Cammy, Karin, you can learn to play characters like that, obviously. But the approach is different. You have to learn to play them in a different style than the regular Karin or Cammy or Ryu players. Because you're trying to look for things that will let you focus your adrenaline rush. And even if you mess something up, you're still on point. You've still gotten your opponent to think that you intended to do whatever it is you ended up doing. There are even characters who make it difficult for commentators to look at it and say, did you mean to do that? Because their inputs have a lot to do in that regard with each other. They're close enough that when they hit buttons, someone has to ask themselves, wait, did they mean to do that? Was that a read? And if the commentators are asking themselves that, not in the heat of the moment, just there, you can bet that your opponent is asking themselves that. Or, worse yet, they'll not do that. They'll think, there's no way you meant to do that. But then you'll do it again by accident, and you'll hit them and they'll totally throw them off. So, players who like to frustrate others are often also good at dealing with their own adrenaline rush because they feed off it. That moment of getting in on the opponent, making the right guess, or reacting with perfect timing and making the opponent look bad, or at least making the opponent feel bad in one way or another. And by bad I mostly mean actually that they feel as if the thing they did was incorrect. Because most people don't actually feel that bad when they're playing as long as they have a fair enough match. But making them feel as if they've done the incorrect thing. Haitani and Phenom are particularly good at this. They do this in a different way though. Necalli is a very good character for this because Necalli has so many options, and so many of them can be not quite option selected, but they're random enough that if you try to hit one and something else comes out, it looks like you tried to hit the first one. He doesn't have a lot of situations where you're trying to do one move and you get something else, and the something else is bad for the situation. For example, if you're trying to do Necalli's Disc Guidance and you don't get it out, he just generally whiffs medium punch in neutral, usually. If he whiffs heavy punch in neutral, if he whiffs overhead in neutral, no one thinks to themselves, oh man, this person is terrible, I can take advantage of that. They think, oh, they're playing footsie. He doesn't have buttons that you would never hit in neutral, and therefore it's difficult to make people feel as if Necalli is not doing what he intends to do. Ryu is the exact opposite of that. If someone sees that you did Solar Plexus Strike at the other side of the screen, they're going to assume that you ripped a Hadouken. There's nothing you could have been trying to do. This is why actually a certain type of player should focus their Ryu play on throwing medium Hadoukens. Because they don't lose out that much, and at least then it sort of looks like they meant to do what they're doing, but that can cause overheads to come out. It's very difficult for a lot of players to get Ryu to play that way because that's the idea. He's a solid character, he's a mostly defensive character. He's not for twitchy adrenaline rush sort of people. You have to do a lot of soul searching to figure out how to play Ryu this way and make it look like you are doing stuff you only intended to do. But you can even change the way you input moves in order to cause that to happen. For example, many of us can probably do something close to the instant air lag or Tiger Knee motion, which is a quarter circle that ends at up. Obviously not really a quarter circle anymore. A quarter circle then up forward. And in a lot of cases, depending on when you press the button, this will still cause your Hadouken to come out. But if you've messed it up, what you'll get is a jumping medium punch instead. Depending on who you're fighting, this could convince them that you're ready for something. In fact, this is one technique that Amar could probably pick up as a general thing because a lot of people like to jump over fireballs at a particular range that she also likes to throw them from. Well, that's the other thing. The character you play the game with can easily cause you to feel the thing you're supposed to feel for that character. If you are just like a naturalist at fighting games, you'll just play the character however they're more or less supposed to be played. You'll fall into the mindset required to play them well. So there's obviously tons of reasons, and no one can tell anyone else specifically how they should be played, or what character is good for them, or even tell them don't play a particular type of character because, hey, you're like this. You can suggest it, it helps a little bit. It might matter, but it could also be just that they have a lot of different skills. It's good to have friends who can look at your games, tell you what you're doing wrong, and then you take that information yourself and figure out, this is how I want to do this. Well then, I suggest you keep on trying out different characters. You might end up being one of those people who can just play nearly anyone. Of course, it does take rather long to get really good at multiple characters, but as you said, you don't really seem to mind not winning, and as long as it doesn't frustrate you to play the character, then it's probably fine. Other people are generally pickier though, so just be careful about anyone you're giving advice to. They might not feel the same way about it as you do. So here we have Captain Falcon, who I seem to recognize.
You lose.
And the main problem with this player is that they take advantage of one thing that Amara does have a relatively large problem with. After she parries, she doesn't like to throw people. And this is one of those players where the only way to deal with them is to either knock them out of the air with jumping medium punch, or parry them and then throw them. Because they're mostly not going to get caught in that. And because they're so good at pressure once they've gotten into space, it becomes very stressful to deal with them. But you see, they're aware, they're hitting that button, that jump in button relatively early. They're setting that up, so they are blocking on purpose. They know what they're doing here. But unless she shoryukens them, which is usually not a good idea, because notice where they jump. They jump after they've been pushed back out by one of her normals. So, the question is, can she get mad and do this all the time? And the problem is that when you are adapting to a new style of thing altogether, you have to tell yourself, oh, I don't actually know what to do after this, so I'm probably still going to lose. You have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with the idea that, okay, they've jumped at me, I parried correctly, I've thrown correctly. I'm still going to lose because I don't actually know what the feeling that follows that is. So she can try very hard to Shoryuken them after every certain thing, but she's very methodical and tends to focus on the ground game. So if she pushes them back out or they push themselves back out and she is forced to react, she can't count on anything but parry. And that basically reduces her options because of emotional things that don't associate with the feeling she's trying to get to. A lot of people who don't end up getting good at fighting games, who feel as if they need to quit them, they have a lot of problems either in the way they've been brought up, being contrary to the way that they naturally play the game, or just not understanding that negative feedback in a particular match doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong. BirdieBot is actually intended to help people with this, because of our easier bots, he's probably the most frustrating one. By nature, he just does things. Now, the input programming I made for him means that he actually is following a pattern that is relatively difficult to deal with, in that he has good options after each of his other actions. But he's pretty good at making you think he will do one thing and then doing something else. He's definitely not random, but he has a lot of things that are mix-ups if you don't know something close to universal responses or your own character's version of option selects. So he's a good bot to train against if you are literally trying to train about being mad at the game. But we have an Ed. We have a PC Ed. However, they have the angel icon, so that means that probably even if they don't have the absolute best connection, they're not going to rage quit, they're not going to do anything stupid, and they're probably not the sort of person that people rage quit on too much. It's looking good.
Round one. Fight.
So this would normally turn into a zoning war. It's fairly easy for it to turn into a zoning war. But this Ed definitely thinks that their spacing is good. And they're mostly right. They just have a little bit too much faith in the cycle rising time. I guess they're more likely used to fighting other players. But because of that, they also appear to be the sort of player that doesn't like specifically go for pressure strings or try to jump from weird angles, making them relatively easy to anti-air. However, they do have a very good knack for timing the other thing that Amara really hates to deal with. People who hit sweep in neutral. Because she can't fathom it as logical, even though it's something that is relatively good against her. But this person does a lot of unsafe things. So generally, she just needs to wait for them to do the unsafe thing and then punish them for it. But what she really will have to do, obviously, is hold down back a lot because they like to sweep. Be it chains, be it spacings, be it after jab strings. Apparently after that particular jab string. They're a fan of this sweep in neutral business. And her general problem is that she'll often get mad at the idea that people will do this as a real tactic, because she just finds it annoying, mostly. But being annoyed at something shouldn't make you feel as if you need to do more of what you're doing. That's one of the traps in fighting games that most people fall into. That they get mad at something their opponent does and try to do more of their own stuff, even though the opponent's probably going to keep on doing the thing because it keeps working. And therefore it would be best to get mad at them for doing it and visualize the ability to punish them for doing it, and that would make you feel a little better. It's a lot cleaner, emotionally speaking, to deal with this sort of situation that way most of the time. So right now they're effectively losing. Looks like they're losing altogether now. But this sort of thing, this sort of switch is exactly the sort of switch you'd see from this sort of player. Note that they still act basically the same. They don't hit sweep, but they hit invincible moves instead. They haven't changed from their flow of doing extremely unsafe things because you won't expect them. That's still pretty much their complete MO. And now they've basically gotten away with it and left. Now, many of us in this moment get really salty about it, because not only have they done unsafe things, they've basically taken the win and ran when, well, it's easy to rationalize to yourself that had you been able to fight them again, that you would have beaten them because you now know that they're, by certain standards, a bad player. But honestly, what makes that different from before? Is it the couple of seconds between matches that you get to say this about? Online is a little bit harder to actually say that, because they possibly have other options. They're probably not safer options, but they're different. But presumably when Amari looks over that match later, it's probably going to cause feelings similar to regret. Of just recognizing, I could have beaten this person, but I just didn't expect them to keep doing what they were doing. And we all have different responses to that. Some of us literally laugh it off. Some of us get super frustrated. Some of us think that the game is stupid. Some of us just get mad at themselves, and some of us like build up this incredible amount of hate for the person who is just playing their game. They're online to have some fun, hit some buttons, and we're here getting mad at them or thinking they're the worst person on the planet. And that isn't in itself a terrible thing. You can hate a person's playstyle and not hate the person. For example, I hate all Guile playstyles. All of them. There are no Guile playstyles I like. Guile is a terrible character. At the same time, I can say I don't want Guile out of this game. Guile makes a lot of people happy. I just really hate the character. I hate to fight him. Do I hate to fight him because I'm bad at it? Well, you could say, yeah, you could actually say that I'm bad at it. But it's not that my character is bad at fighting Guile. She's decent. Colleen is iffy. But Chili is decent at fighting Guile, and then if I really felt terrible I could switch to Bison. But Guile as a style makes me upset. And I quote-unquote hate Guile playing. Not so much Guile players. Because they're just here to have some fun or whatever. But here's the key of understanding why this upsets different people different ways. Amara feels the need to get in on Guile to do damage, to not be walled out indefinitely. But what she lacks isn't really the ability to do that, it's the reaction to that move. That's all it is. Guile has 2 moves that she hasn't learned reactions to yet, and that's it. Any loss that comes out of a Guile match for her is simply, I haven't punished his knee strike thing. That's the entirety of her losses. So, what to feel in that moment? There's anger at yourself for not practicing it enough, but I mean, you can't practice for every single matchup all the time. People have other things to do with their lives. If you're not sponsored and you're not pro, there's going to be some move in this game you can't punish. Or that you didn't even know you could punish, which is even worse. Or that, as you can see there, her reaction as to how to punish it is bad. So, technically, she loses the same way to all Guiles because they all do this same thing and she can't stop any of it. Because she doesn't block long enough. And why doesn't she block long enough? That's the better question. She doesn't block long enough because of the feeling that if she did, she will never win. But that feeling comes from the knowledge that she can't punish that move. As far as she's concerned, they get endless pressure, it's unfair, it's stupid. But that is not a fault of the game, and it is not a fault of her opponent.
Round 2.
They're doing stuff that might be a little unsafe in the hope that they get to keep on some pressure, because what else can you do? He can try to just play the Sonic Boom game forever. But it doesn't work that well. But notice now he's had to stop. Now he has to walk up and stuff. And try to throw. The game changed. The game changed because she blocks longer. But now she has to do the whole throw attacking thing, which is another whole layer of playing that has to happen. So being prepared for all of this, it would be much easier if she could have just punished the bullet knee with Shoryuken occasionally, which would then lead to at least the opponent being knocked down, her getting some pressure. And the important thing here is understanding when you haven't managed to do anything that changes your opponent's perception of the fight itself. This is the most important thing about learning to fight other people. Figuring out which moves cause them to re-evaluate the match and which don't. Because if they're doing something that you can take advantage of, but you also get good pressure after it, you can distract them from the fact that they just got beat out of something. They might not even notice. They might think, oh, I hit a button when I shouldn't have, without knowing that you can flatly punish that. Maybe you were a little slow and you hit them while they were trying to hit another button and counter hit them. And they think, well, I could do better next time. Birdie and Bot is, again, very good at that, but unfortunately, a bot really isn't going to get that feeling, they're just going to cause it. You can watch out for whether or not Birdie Bot causes that feeling in you, though. Because he's really good at doing things that are mostly not easily dealt with from your side, and leaves you with the feeling of, okay, it's my turn now. Oh wait, no, it's not my turn. So you can use him to train some reactions and emotions in that way. Because there's actually literally no way to react to everything Birdie Bot can do. And he's generally built in such a way that you won't be able to recognize one thing as a definite thing that is going to happen. The only tell he really has is his standing medium punches, and those can come and turn into nearly anything. Your biggest strength is being able to get away from him or respace yourself right afterwards. He makes a move, you don't get hit by the move, and you respace yourself instead of trying to do something about the move. It's part of what makes the character so strong in neutral. Fortunately, BirdieBot is really easy to input, and you'll get to see that at the end of the week at theusual2-mk.org. Certainly easier to input than BalrogBot, but depending on how you hold your controller, you might be able to get BalrogBot in without too much stress. He's only complicated because of one particular part. So we're looking at the Ken player again. And what are we expecting from Ken players? Nothing in particular, but they tend to want to get in a bit more, otherwise they'd probably be playing Ryu. You can mostly assume that they're going to do that sort of thing. Specifically that sort of thing. Don't be fooled just because the Ken player moves away from you. That does not necessarily mean that they want to stay there. So we've got some dancing around. We've got some relatively decent spacing, but not great. And some tricky jump-ins. So we're assuming that this player's aim is mostly to be frustrating. And to make it difficult to pin them down and actually do damage. Now, Amara doesn't like this sort of player either, because they have a tendency to guess on Hadoukens, and having her Hadoukens jumped on makes her angry. Basically. Now, what do you do with that information? People jumping on my Hadoukens makes me angry. You could throw a couple Hadoukens to make them jump, and then beat them up when they jump. Of course, they're going to get over some of them, that's the entire point. But as a good zoner, your job is generally to throw less Hadoukens overall. You throw them when you feel that your opponent no longer wants to jump. Or when you feel as if you can react to the jump even if they are in a particular space. That's probably one of the highest skills a zoner can have, to know the exact range at which, if I throw this right now, even if they jump at the moment that I threw it, I can still do something about it. Because there's a spacing that's like that. And if you learn to identify that spacing as a zoner, you can just focus your fireball game against this sort of player around basically just that. And not worry about all the other little nuances of when to throw fireballs. There's more you can read into it. There's a specific timing at which people jump, like they're walking backward and then they jump, or they walk forward and then they jump at a specific time depending on the player, but you can learn it. Learning it per person is a little bit harder, but but for this person, they actually don't jump that much. Maybe they were getting lucky before, or maybe they had a good read on when Amara throws fireballs. But getting mad at having the fireballs jumped over translates into the emotion of, I should vary my fireball timing so that doesn't happen. And it allows you to focus yourself heavily on the fireball game, because the moment they close in, that part of the match is over until you reset the situation. You can let that entire feeling dissipate and go back to whatever else it was you were doing. Figuring out really good defense, figuring out how to deal with a particular input challenge that you have with your own character, figuring out how to get mad at the fact that Ken builds laser faster than Ryu sometimes. That sort of thing. In fact, even getting mad at your own input challenges can be good for you if you understand how to make use of it. Well, here's the situation I was talking about. Here is BirdieBot moving around and doing things from far out. And as you can see, we have the reaction of, okay, He's moved, he landed near me, I should do something. Now, most of us will get hit in that situation because we'll not quite understand how fast we needed to do the thing, or we'll miscalculate how far away we could do the thing from, and he'll get away. At least some of the time. And that's frustrating. What you do with the frustration, though, is the key to whether or not you actually are getting better at the game. If you tell yourself, damn it, I need to do that better, you can only get so far because your opponent is the one mostly in control of when they do their moves. You can only either have your reactions on point because you were either expecting it or you've built up extremely good reactions, or you can learn to not have that be a thing. So for example, we know that this Alex does stuff and then actually dashes up and does powerbomb afterwards. Or regular throws, apparently. Now, it's not really something you could easily figure out in a very short space of time, but it's better to assume it than not. So they spend a lot of time hitting buttons in order to hold advantage and then get the opponent close and throw, one or another. See? So what's the best answer here? The best answer is just light shoryuken everything. Because light shoryuken is relatively hard to respond to. Especially with Alex's crush counter normals, he really has a hard time dealing with it. And it has a good long active time. So Alex can literally collide with this depending on when he does his own normals and just end up in a bad situation. So whenever things feel uncomfortable, just light shoryuken. That's pretty much the answer to the match. See? He actually can't easily punish that. His reaction to the light shoryuken comes because he has to be expecting you to do it. And after he's expected you to do it enough, then he'll stop doing all the other stuff you didn't like. Because now he's thinking, alright, I gotta wait out for that light shoryuken. But then you can play the other rest of the game because now you're not getting tossed constantly. So even though the match goes better, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win. In this case, it helped. It helped because if you focus on, okay, I keep on getting hit, I'm just going to throw shoryukens until you stop doing that so that I don't have to worry about you doing that anymore. The goal is achieved either way. The goal being to stop him from doing certain things. The question would have been, would it have been better to keep doing the light shoryukens? Well, at that point, you have to start to think about, what did I lose by doing it? What did I feel in that matchup that made me think I should stop doing this? Because it is easy to feel, okay, this is a bad idea because my opponent can clearly crush counter me. But if your opponent, if you have no other answer and you have this happen to you, you might as well have gotten crush countered the other way. You didn't make your situation better by saying, I should probably not do this thing that is dangerous. Now, there are execution issues to consider as well, but in the end, the situation itself doesn't change too much. Here it's okay because, like, he's at the other side of the screen, there's other options, there's Hadoukens that can be thrown, and stuff like that.
Looks like you could use more training.
And it's not a move that makes sense to parry because you can't tell when Alex is going to do it well enough to parry. You can throw them off pretty well. In this case, you see that, yes, she got hurt, but he didn't actually do all that well. He used all of his meter on what was effectively a really basic punish. And the same thing would have happened there. It's just Shoryuken. Screw it all, just Shoryuken, because you just can. And sometimes that is the answer to everything. The game making the moves less invincible, or conditionally invincible, didn't really change that very much, because they're really, really fast. Ryu's Light Shoryuken is 3 frames. It is literally a jab worth of speed. You can just hit this in neutral if you want, and bad things will happen to your opponent. You might frustrate them too. And when you feel you finally managed to frustrate them, then you can stop. But this is the part where understanding your opponent's mindset becomes the most important thing. Right here, this is the moment where Light Shoryukens have become good again. Why? Because your opponent has stopped thinking about it. They started thinking about things that they could do and their V-trigger and moves they could pull off and how the fact they lost a life or whatever, and it doesn't matter anymore because Light Shoryuken to the gut, and down they go.
You win.
So, again, this is the emotional part. You have to understand not only your own emotions, but how other people at different levels of the game have their own emotions. For example, it doesn't make sense to do it again right now. Because he's been thinking about it. That's the last thing he lost to. He's not thinking now, okay, I should go for command grabs now, because I'm sure they'll stop doing the Light Shoryuken thing. No, he's going to back off, and he's going to open himself up for like crouching medium kick and all those other things. But around now, he's starting to feel himself. He's starting to think, I can handle this. He's starting to think this isn't so bad anymore. But now, around here, he's back to thinking, oh damn it, that Light Shoryuken again. The ebb and flow of other people's feelings is important, and furthermore, that's for the particular reason why having unshakable feelings, regardless of what that feeling is, even if it affects your plans, having unshakable feelings is important for that reason. So now what are they thinking about? They're thinking about, how do I get some damage back? Alright, I've got some damage back, how do I keep the pressure on? For example, that would have been, depending on whether or not his eyeball meetings are good, that would have been another Light Shoryuken. And had that been another Light Shoryuken, believe it or not, she'd probably have won. Because it would have recovered quickly enough that whatever he did wouldn't have actually gotten through there. But the key is to make sure you're not on tilt. On tilt is when you're trying to do anything that isn't your natural state. If you are an angry person and you are trying to stay calm, you are on tilt. If you are a vicious, spiteful, vindictive person and you're trying to tell yourself that this isn't your opponent's fault, they're just having some fun, in the match, you're on tilt. And if you're a happy-go-lucky person who just tries to play the game for fun, and your opponent is teabagging you and making you mad, you're on tilt. It's always bad. But as you can see, if you understand playing certain characters, it really, really doesn't matter how high level you get if you can play your own game. If you need proof of this, simply watch Itabashi Zangief fight pretty much anyone. Everyone would tell you there is no way you should just run up and try to either throw or meaty that many times. But that makes him happy. And sometimes he'll completely incorrectly read a neutral jump to the point of jumping and using the EX meter and getting terribly punished. And he'll laugh it off. Why? Because that's how he plays the game. And he's happy. However, if he were the type to get mad at that moment of, damn it, I went for the read and it wasn't the right thing and it failed, he's on tilt. And that makes him think too much. And your opponent starts to think about getting into his head. They start to think about how he can be conditioned. And they start to think about whether or not he can be made to do a particular thing because of a success or a failure at the last thing. But this doesn't work on Itabashi Zangief. It doesn't work on Wolfram. There are a whole specific set of high-level players who are unconditionable, who act like it's always their turn, who act like they don't care what your idea of how the game should be played is, and yet they're sponsored, they're high level, someone is giving them money to play this game, and they are not doing anything in terms of controlling their emotions at all. They're just performing well. Sometimes they don't even perform specifically that well, they're just happy. But again, the important thing is to understand that I'm not telling you, even in the slightest, to not be mad. I'm telling you that if you start off not mad, don't get mad. And if you start off really mad, stay really mad. You're probably just the sort of person who has the energy to stay really mad. As mentioned early in the stream, Amara's problem with Cammy players is that they get in, and it annoys her. They get in and they jump and they do all these annoying jumpy things, and they hit pressure buttons and apparently lights when they jump in. But she knows exactly how Cammy annoys her. She knows what they're going to do, for the most part. This one just happens to have one option in here that most don't use. And she'll just learn to get mad at that option instead. And if she learns to get mad at that option, she'll probably focus correctly on all the rest of the match and then focus on that one thing. They jump with light, and then they neutral jump. I'm not really sure what the best response here is, but it's probably neutral jump, medium punch, because they also throw, so whatever, just neutral jump. It even beats them on the way up, so it's not like it matters. So now she can go, okay, I'm mad at you because this is how you approach this matchup. I'm gonna beat you this way. But whether or not she can execute it isn't really relevant. It's that they have a particular thing that they do that is effective for their gameplay. They didn't come into the match thinking, I know this Ryu, I know that this is going to be difficult for them to deal with. They just came into the match to do a thing. This is just how they've learned to play the game. So, their argument, well, you shouldn't be mad at that. They don't mean to make you upset with this. So what? It doesn't matter if they mean to make you upset or not. They're doing a thing that upsets you, and if you are a person who is often upset, you should stay upset. And focus on the thing so you can learn to deal with it. For example, we know that this Cammy mostly has to do this from a range where she's easily parried. When she's jumping from the front, she's parryable. When she's not, her light kick doesn't mean anything. But Amara's not going to necessarily win this, because who would have built up a reaction to neutral jump after being crossed up? That's not a thing people learn. She could beat this Cammy in like a first to 10 set where she eventually gets this done. She could beat them if she figures it out enough to do it enough times that she'll get like pressure off them and win. But it's not likely. So she's got to rely on respacing herself and other things of that nature. and hope it wears out. That doesn't mean she's playing bad, and it doesn't mean the Cammy's playing badly or particularly well either. It's just how the match goes. You meet something new in the game, and it makes you mad. Or it does the opposite, and you tell yourself, I need to absolutely focus on this. I need to figure out how to make this work. I need to figure out how to get around this tactic. But at the end of the day, the key to the match doesn't change. Either you're going to be able to beat it, going to be able to pull from the depths of your skill in the game to immediately react a certain way, or you're not. And that really has nothing to do with how you feel about the thing in question. So depending on who exactly, or more accurately the opposing character of the next match, we will go for either just one or two more. It's not that there's much more to say on the matter, so... Is this even going to connect in? Looks like not. Fighting games do take long to learn. And a lot of the reason for why they take long to learn has to do with this sort of thing. Of the thing in this world that is most capable of making humans feel strongly, war and sports are basically those things. And those who learn to control themselves in the avenues of war and sports, and in this case a sport that can approximate to thinking that it's a war, have a lot more success in life. Oh, that's what she's saying? And how does she even like... Okay, well, never mind. Maybe they do this so that you can make friends with that particular character and have a meetup or whatever. Also, don't we know this Akuma? I don't think we do.
Round one.
No, not this one.
Fight.
So what do we know about this Akuma so far? They like moving relatively safely and using grounded pressure. They do jump sometimes, but they're not a pressure string into jump sort of player so far. They like keeping control of the space on the ground pretty well, and that means that they spend a lot more time hitting buttons that are intended to push you to particular spaces and take advantage of that. This is Amara's favorite type of character to fight because, win or lose, she doesn't have to deal with a lot of the things that she normally is mad at, frustrated by, etc. However, her opponent might recognize certain things and shift toward that style, and that would make it more difficult. So here's the problem. If you're a person who's generally mad at the game, or mad at other people, or just mad in general, and you finally meet an opponent who, win or lose, doesn't make you mad, what then? How do you maintain your anger? Well, you could just not, first of all. You could go with whatever emotion the match itself brings out in you. If Akuma doesn't make you mad, then stay not mad for as long as you can. But if you feel as if, oh, this Akuma could change their style to something that makes me mad, you can get mad at the very idea of them doing it. You don't have to get mad at what they're doing now. Because that means that you'll be totally ready for the moment they do change their style.
Final round. Fight.
My experience with this is having a friend who plays super defensively, and this is a long time ago, who thought as a result that he could play any character well. He took a lot of pleasure in stopping other people's advances. And as an aggressive player, this was terrible for me because back then the game was very different. It was more difficult to open people up, even more so than now. And the damage was such that you could only afford to make a certain number of mistakes, especially with characters who didn't do a lot of damage. So you played high damage characters with reasonably good ways of stopping you from doing certain things, and then just win. And eventually I learned to beat this person. I actually don't remember how I learned to do that. There's just a specific way that I learned to play, mostly with baiting, dodging, and throwing, I think, that led to their emotions changing. But whereas they would quote-unquote taunt me somewhat, they didn't really necessarily mean it that way. That was just the way they expressed themselves. They couldn't have the same thing done to them. It bothered them too much. So once I learned to beat them that way, they basically stopped playing me. Why? Because they recognized correctly that playing me put them on tilt. They would play me, they would still enjoy playing me, but they would do it for much less time. It wasn't even specifically because they didn't find playing me fun. Because if they didn't find playing me fun at all, they probably wouldn't have done it. This Akuma is a lot like that. To beat this Akuma requires a shift in the way that Amara thinks about matches in general. But that doesn't mean she'd have any fun trying. There's a certain aspect of zoning that is relatively high level that she has to unlock, basically, before this particular type of Akuma becomes easy to defeat. The idea that when they walk backward and then walk forward again, they're almost always going to be able to be hit with Hadouken. Right, that moment there where they've decided, alright, I'm out of range, I'm throwing my own Hadouken. They're not going to throw another one. They're just going to lose. You can throw yours and you're fine. Also, they have the tendency to, at a specific range that they have moved back and forth to throw their Hadouken. So, it's like, they'll dance around and then they'll walk backward a little bit too long, and that's your cue to jump. And if you happen to not jump, because you didn't recognize it in time, then you wait for their Hadouken and then throw yours. See? He'll always do it. But if you don't believe he'll always do it, then more things happen in the match that you didn't need to happen. And our instincts just get more complicated than that. The Tatsu is a good thing because even if he did throw another one, it would be good, but it's much less safe than throwing your own Hadouken and hoping it works out. That was probably supposed to be a Hadouken. That would be my guess. That medium punch forward was supposed to be his Hadouken. So at this moment right here, the jump comes because, as I said, there's a specific thing she would have to master about watching people to know when to jump. Because he dances back and forth a certain distance in order to make you think he's going to walk backward further. But you'd have to react to him actually walking backward further, which is difficult. So, while many people try to end their matches and therefore end this sort of stream on a positive note, is that really what you want to do? What if you're like me and just like being toxic about things and want to leave the game with a burning hatred for all opponents who manage to take advantage of your weaknesses that day? Well, that's another psychological lesson as to how to plan out your time in the game. to know when to switch to training mode, to know whether or not you're the sort of person who's happier warming up in training mode beforehand, and so on. There are lots of ways to optimize your own improvement and time and your enjoyment of the game based on little things like that. But in general for Amara, ending a stream or a set of matches on a victory isn't necessarily a useful thing. Sometimes it could be more so considered that it doesn't have a specific meaning in the first place. You could argue, why would one want to play something that makes you mad instead of something that makes you happy? But people who have that question probably haven't played, or more accurately, don't hang around with a lot of people who play video games, because the video game era, especially years ago, was heavily about playing games specifically because they were challenging enough to make you angry. Fans of Dark Souls would be very familiar with this. Not everyone is made angry by Dark Souls, but some people play Dark Souls angrily. So this will be the last match, regardless of whether or not the person actually rematches. And we're looking at, let's guess, Vega or Urian? But no, not really. We're looking at a main character, Karine in the black. Exactly the same level, character level, PC player, etc. Now the Karine matchup, mostly when you don't know anything else about the Karine player, is mostly about hitting standing hard punch in neutral. Just punch them in the face, flatly. But this Karine jumps. And they jump with pressure-y stuff. They jump after stuff. They don't like staying on the ground. So what can be done about that? Well, someone who jumps this much usually has decent cross-ups. And it can make it hard to deal with them. That in turn, of course, can be frustrating, and then you have to figure out how to deal with the frustration. Amara likes the ground, so you're not going to get her to easily switch to using air-to-airs. And that's okay. She either has to figure out how to reposition herself entirely so this can't happen, through a lot of backdashes. And backdash parry, which is hard to do in itself, but possible. Or she has to basically lose because Karine has too many good cross-up positions. The key is to understand again, if you're going to be mad, you have to focus the anger into the thing that will work best, even if best isn't that much better. Because otherwise, you're on tilt. So in this matchup, she needs to probably backdash Shoryuken or backdash parry a lot of the time. And it'll probably help her get away from those mix-ups as well, so she can wake up backdash too. But again, she doesn't know how to do this. She's never practiced backdash parry, because she just doesn't like playing like that. She doesn't understand how to play like that. So the result is being nearly perfect here. But it doesn't really mean that it goes any better the other way. All that happens is that she gets mad at herself for not doing the correct timing or the correct answer. When there is no correct answer, it's just hard. And you're choosing between hard things. But this entire match is basically backdash oriented. And the problem with that is that you then have to think about, okay, how do I reposition myself enough to have enough room to backdash? And how do I make myself focus enough to actually backdash, given that I don't do it naturally? But note how relatively helpless this player becomes if she backdashes away, even without it being the best thing to do at the moment. Because they don't know how to approach fully. That worked out, but it could easily have not.
Final round. Fight.
But the thing that the backdash also does is make it difficult for the player to spend the same amount of time setting up their jump spaces that they did before. So now she has to get over, take a little damage, relatively loud damage, and then go back to backdashes. But again, she hasn't trained it, so it doesn't actually work. But it's not because it's a bad idea, and it's not because this is too hard to execute in itself, it's just lack of practice or understanding of a particular situation. But note again that the opponent has changed the way they play. They had to change the way they play, which allows her to be less upset about the whole thing overall. So they've come away with their victory, but she gained something as well. Whereas trying to parry them for a whole 2 rounds would have just probably resulted in a very quickly ending match, or nothing in particular happening. And so with that, we bid you good night and hope that your own battles are filled with peace, love, joy, rage, war, or whatever suits you. This is Rillian and Mara for 2MK Group. Good night.